The paranormal is a very terrifying subject and experience that I personally have my reservations about. I wouldn't say I'm as skeptical as the average person, but I do believe in the existence of something otherworldly. That doesn't make this story any less credible. I'm actually quite superstitious, the type of person that tends to hold his breath when crossing cemeteries, not using the Ouija board correctly for fear of a negative spirit attachment, never speaking ill of the dead in any capacity for fear I could become riddled with misfortune and tragedy. So, I guess you could say I have a level of paranoia that is a bit illogical. But I don't want to be generic by starting a story off by stating that I'm a skeptic. I just think those types of experiences are less believable. So I'll do my best to recount some of the creepiest ghostly experiences I've ever had. So this particular story happened when I was in my early 20s. I remember it just like it was yesterday. I worked the overnight shift at my hotel in the heart of St. Louis, Missouri, and I was the only manager, as well as staff working in the middle of the night. The hotel was a sprawling Victorian-era structure, with dark, winding corridors and rooms that seemed to whisper secrets of the past. I'd heard rumors of ghostly encounters, but had always dismissed them as the stuff of local folklore. One night, I couldn't exactly say what time it was exactly, but I remember it was super late night, so most likely around 2 a.m. Now, of course, hotels are a business. You see many people walk through its halls. The phone is constantly going off due to reservations being made, and generally a very busy place regardless. This was around the autumn season, just before the holiday rush. So, I'd say around November. You could hear the wind howling outside pretty loudly. I was actually kind of concerned that the power might go out because the storm was so severe, so I was kind of expecting it. Anywho, I get a phone call from the landline phone from room 218. The call itself was a bit bizarre, but as staff we need to cater to all hotel guests. The phone rang and I answered hello. There was no answer, but I heard what sounded like chatter in the background. It sounded like some sort of man repeating the word hello, but it wasn't like it was into the phone itself, if that makes sense. I kept hearing hello in the background. It must have been at least 40 seconds before I hung up and rung them back. Nothing but silence. I was confused. Not a second later, I received another phone call from the same room. The same voice I had earlier sounding as if it was in the background, and not into the phone, like seconds before, was heard once again. I'm a little bit weirded out, so I tell the man, "Sir, can you please tell me what you need? I can provide assistance for you." Still, I get nothing but the consecutive hello in the background again, before the line ultimately went dead. I hang up the phone. I figured I'd probably solve this issue easier if I went to the room directly and spoke to the man himself. So I ended up going all the way up to the second floor to room 218. Now this is where everything gets weird. The power goes off for an entire minute as soon as I get up to the second floor. Like right as soon as I turn the knob and walk straight through the hallway, power just goes out. My immediate reaction is, what the heck? The power goes back on, I breathe a sigh of relief, and I'm heading for room 218. I finally get there, and I can see the light is on from under the door. I knock a couple times, no answer. Knock again, wait a couple seconds. Nobody to answer the door. I proceed to knock on the door, then say, "Sir, this is staff, I'm here to help you." A growing concern starts to mount within me. "Sir, I'm just checking to see if everything is all right. You called multiple times. If you don't answer the door, I'm going to use the extra key I have to open the room." Even after saying all that, nobody comes to the door. I hear that same hello from the man I heard on the phone, suddenly coming from the inside of the room, saying it 3 times. Hello, hello, hello. What happened next really sent a chill down my spine. I honestly, to this day, can't explain how this even happened, but here goes. As I grab the key from my pocket to insert it into the keyhole, I open the door, and to my absolute surprise, there is nobody inside the room. This absolutely astounded me. I could have sworn that there was someone in here, and the man's voice was distinct. You could hear it well, though faintly, coming from the room and rather calm. I knew that there was someone there. There had to be. Have I lost my mind? I have no idea. So I quickly ran down to the staff desk to look at the computer, looking for the name of the guest who had the reservation in room 218. To my horror, I found out that the room was vacant. There was nobody staying there with that reservation. Worse yet, I had no explanation for it. I heard the man on the phone, I heard the man behind the door, but when I finally opened it up with the light even being on, there was nobody there. Now maybe I can explain the light being on. It may not sound like much sense, but maybe the brief power outage could have turned the light on somehow. Then again, the power outage occurring at that moment when I was checking up on the man still left me with more questions than answers. Now, this second story is a bit of a spiritual experience in a sense. I'm not one to quickly jump to conclusions, but it made me realize that there could be a guiding light or some sort of guardian angel that is protecting me. Regardless, this ghost story is a bit of a wild one, and definitely scary looking back on it, but I think helps me to believe that there could be an afterlife and a heaven. This was the time when I went exploring on vacation for the first time solo in a different country in France. I'm not even close to being an experienced hiker, but I am a thrill seeker. The French Alps were a stark contrast to the bustling cities I was accustomed to. Their towering peaks, shrouded in mist, seemed to dwarf even the most imposing skyscrapers. I'd ventured into this wilderness drawn by the promise of adventure and solitude. But as the days turned into weeks, my initial excitement had waned, replaced by a growing sense of isolation. One particularly treacherous day, I found myself lost, the familiar trails obscured by a thick fog. The wind howled, carrying with it the biting chill of the mountain air. My body ached and my supplies were dwindling. As darkness fell, I realized I was trapped, a tiny speck in a vast, unforgiving landscape. Desperation fueled my efforts to find a way out. I stumbled through the undergrowth, my flashlight barely piercing the gloom. The cold was numbing, and I could feel my strength fading. Just when I thought I couldn't go on, I heard a voice clear and distinct echoing in my mind. "Keep going," it said. "You can do it." I hesitated, unsure if it was a hallucination brought on by the cold and exhaustion, but the voice was insistent, urging me forward. With renewed determination, I pressed on, the voice guiding me through the darkness. Then disaster struck. I slipped on a hidden rock, tumbling down a steep incline. The impact was jarring, and I felt a sharp pain in my leg. I lay there, unable to move, the realization of my predicament sinking in. I was alone, injured, and lost in the heart of the Alps. The voice returned, stronger than before. "You have to keep moving," it said. "You can't stay here." I tried to stand, but my leg buckled beneath me. The pain was excruciating, but the voice was relentless. With a Herculean effort, I managed to pull myself to my feet. The voice continued to guide me, each step a struggle against the pain and exhaustion. As dawn broke, I found myself at the edge of a cliff. Below me lay a valley, bathed in the soft light of the rising sun. The sight filled me with a sense of hope, and I began to descend, the voice still guiding me. The descent was perilous, but I managed to make my way down the steep slope. As I reached the bottom, I saw a small chapel in the distance. A glimmer of hope ignited within me, and I pushed myself forward, my leg throbbing with every step. When I finally reached the chapel, I collapsed on the worn stone steps. The door was locked, but I managed to find a small window, which I pried open. I crawled inside, the warmth of the interior a welcome relief. As I lay there, recovering, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been watched over, protected. The voice that had guided me through the darkness, the strength that had allowed me to overcome the pain, it was all too extraordinary to be mere coincidence. A few days later, as I was preparing to leave the chapel, I noticed a peculiar stain on the wall. It was a faint image, almost imperceptible, but it seemed to depict a man with long hair and a gentle smile. As I stared at the image, a chill ran down my spine. It was the face of Jesus, or so it seemed to me. I stood there for a long time contemplating the events of the past few days. Had I truly been guided by a supernatural force? Or was it simply the power of the human spirit pushing me to survive against all odds? Whatever the truth, I knew that I would never forget this experience, this encounter with the unknown that had forever changed my life. Years later, I found myself drawn back to the French Alps. The memory of my harrowing ordeal had faded, but the lingering sense of wonder and gratitude remained. I decided to visit the chapel where I had sought refuge, hoping to find some closure. What I didn't know, however, was that there was actually a cemetery there as well. I must have missed it the very first time I was there. I wandered among the gravestones, reading the names and dates of those who had gone before. I know this sounds a bit creepy, and most people would be thinking, Jason, what the heck are you even doing? Cemeteries are a sign of bad luck and misfortune, but to me it actually brought me peace. I remember seeing a huge cemetery statue. It was of a cross. I decided to think back about my time getting lost in the Alps, and I started to pray. I thanked God for my survival, for the strength He had given me, and for the guardian who had watched over me. As I prayed, I felt a warmth spreading through my body, a sensation that was both comforting and unsettling. That's when I felt the weirdest tickling on my neck. It was very faint and obviously coming from behind. I felt chills. It was almost like the hairs on my neck were being tucked, as if to get my attention. It was very weird. You don't normally hear about stories where someone has their neck hair tugged, but that's exactly how it felt. Now, this is perhaps the most horrific and scary part of my entire encounter. I know this is going to sound like I'm a nut, but I swear, this is what I saw. I don't know if it was the man himself, or some angel, or even a demonic ghost trying to show himself to me, but I know I saw something. Right behind me, there were some trees and woods, of course. I look and I see a man with really long hair and a white robe just staring at me. He was up in the tree, just sitting there. From a distance, the figure looked cloudy to me. I couldn't make out the face clearly, but I knew it was a man's face with a beard. I went to get a better look, but by the time I got closer, it slowly faded away. I left with a sense of confusion and lack of understanding of what I just saw. But here is my theory. I think it was one of Jesus's angels. I had literally prayed a second before, telling God, thank you for saving my life, for giving me the strength to keep forward when I was lost in those woods. I literally could have died. If I hadn't been pushed by an invisible force to help keep me going, there's no telling what would have happened to me. So I think if I wasn't hallucinating or seeing some weird mirage, that this was God's way of letting me know I got you. Even if it was super scary to see someone there just sitting on a tree. My friend Jack was a staunch skeptic. He believed in science, logic, and empirical evidence. The idea of ghosts and spirits was, in his opinion, nothing more than superstition. I, on the other hand, was always open to the possibility of the unknown. One evening, Jack and his wife, Sarah, invited me to join them on a ghost hunt at an abandoned abbey in the nearby countryside. I was intrigued. The abbey, once a thriving religious center, had been deserted for decades. Rumors of ghostly apparitions and unexplained phenomena had circulated for years. We arrived at the abbey under the cover of darkness. The moon cast eerie shadows across the crumbling stone walls. As we ventured inside, the air was thick with the musty scent of decay. Dust motes danced in the beams of our flashlights, revealing the dilapidated interior. "This place is creepy," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Jack scoffed. "It's just an old building, Sarah. There's nothing to be afraid of." We explored the abbey, our flashlights illuminating the darkened corridors. The silence was broken only by the occasional creak of floorboards or the distant hoot of an owl. As we wandered through the abbey, a strange sense of unease began to creep over me. We reached the abbey's chapel, a vast, cavernous space with towering stained glass windows. The altar was covered in a thick layer of dust, and the pews were in disrepair. As we stood in the center of the chapel, a cold draft swept through the room. "Did you feel that?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. "You left the door slightly open, so the wind could have crept in for a second." That's what Jack said, replying to Sarah. Even though I thought that was a bit of a stretch, I went along with it as well. We continued to explore the chapel, our flashlights sweeping across the darkened walls. Suddenly, a faint glow appeared in one of the stained glass windows. It was a figure, a monk, his face illuminated by the eerie light. "Did you see that?" I asked, starting to get nervous. Jack and Sarah exchanged glances. "It's probably just overthinking. Since it's a creepy place, you'll tend to see things that your mind thinks exist, but it isn't real," Jack said. but I felt it was. The figure was real. A ghostly apparition trapped within the stained glass window. As we watched, the figure began to move, its spectral form shimmering in the moonlight. We followed the figure as it moved through the chapel, its ethereal form gliding effortlessly over the dusty floor. It disappeared into a side chapel, and we followed. Inside the side chapel, we saw a group of monks, their ghostly forms standing motionless in the dim light. They were dressed in their robes, their faces serene and peaceful. "It's a mass apparition," I whispered, my voice trembling. Jack and Sarah were speechless. They stood there, their eyes wide with disbelief. As we watched, the ghostly monks began to chant, their voices echoing through the chapel. After what felt like an eternity, the chanting faded. The ghostly monks stood motionless for a moment, then began to fade away, their forms dissolving into the darkness. We stood there in silence, our minds reeling from what we had just witnessed. It was a moment that would stay with me forever. The abbey was haunted, and I had seen the ghosts with my own eyes. Let me be clear, this wasn't an in-your-face, here are the monks type of haunting. It was mostly a sight and sound type of haunting. The hymns weren't these incredibly clear orchestras of sound. No, this was more subtle, and the monks were faded apparitions, barely visible. You could see three faces, mists almost. To be fair, this is a far-fetched story, so I get that. But that is the end of the story. It was super freaky. And I don't know if I'll ever be comfortable going to abbeys or old churches, especially at night or any time of day, ever again. So this is somewhat of a stereotypical ghost haunting. I know people are probably sick and tired of hearing them, but I really think it's worth telling. I used to live in an old farmhouse in the middle of the countryside in southern Indiana, rural area. I wanted to do a paranormal investigation of the house to detect any paranormal, so me and my friends, we decided to go. We arrived at the farmhouse on a crisp autumn evening, the wind howling through the bare trees. The house was shrouded in darkness, its silhouette looming ominously against the moonlit sky. As we approached the front door, a cold draft swept through the air. As we wandered through the farmhouse, a strange sense of unease began to creep over me. We reached the farmhouse's kitchen, a small, cramped space with peeling wallpaper and a rusty sink. The kitchen table was covered in a thick layer of dust, and the cabinets were filled with empty jars and cans. As we stood in the center of the kitchen, a cold draft swept through the room. Suddenly, a faint sound echoed through the room. It was a whisper, a woman's voice calling out in despair. "Help me," the voice cried. We froze, our minds wired from the scary ambience of the house and freaky vibes we were getting. The voice seemed to come from the pantry. As we approached the pantry, we saw a faint glow emanating from inside. Curiosity piqued, we pushed open the door. The pantry was small and dark, the only source of light coming from a single window high above. In the corner of the pantry, we saw a figure sitting on the floor. It was a woman, her face shrouded in shadows. She was wearing a tattered dress, and her eyes were filled with a haunting sadness. The woman did not say a word. She simply stared at us, her eyes filled with a silent plea for help. We approached the woman cautiously, but the crazy thing was, she was illuminating but solid, not super bright or anything. I think it was natural light shining somehow on her. We could see that she was emaciated, but her skin was pale. I remember then that we had to go and get help, not thinking it was a paranormal experience of the sort. "I'm going to get back to town and ask for help. You guys can stay here." I remember saying, but they both didn't want to be left here alone. Kind of stupid, but we left her alone. We returned, had called the cops to the farmhouse. There was no sign of the girl whatsoever. She was gone. I just remember that we looked back at the Willow Creek farmhouse. It stood there in silence, its windows dark and empty. We had survived the haunting, but the memory of the ghostly woman would stay with us forever. This is the first time I have ever felt as though I am living with a ghost. There has been no real evidence or sightings. There's just this feeling. As I get into bed at night, I set my clock radio alarm for the morning. Most nights, but not always, I can hear soft music playing. Originally, I thought my radio was broken and still playing, but I've tried shutting it off. I could still hear the music. I've even gone so far as to unplug it. Still the music is playing. I thought I was going crazy, but my husband says he hears it too. Other things that happen in the house is cold spots and strange noises. And ever since we had our daughter, the spirit doesn't like me to shut my bedroom door and will open it sometime during the night. I figure it is protecting my daughter. The only other thing out of the ordinary is something my husband witnessed. The lights were off when my husband went in the bathroom. He just happened to look in the mirror and saw the reflection of a man. He seemed to be angry, but he was not looking directly at my husband, just sort of past him. My husband didn't feel as though the man was mad at him. The anger was towards someone else. I'm not really afraid of this spirit. I will admit I'm a bit spooked. After all, I've never lived with a spirit before. I've never questioned my landlord about the history of the house. He's just not the sort of person to talk about things like that. When I was about 10, give or take a few years, I was sleeping over at a friend's house. We were getting ready for bed. My friend was in her bedroom and I was walking up the stairs and went past her bedroom to get to the bathroom. It was night and dark outside, but her room was well lit. As I passed her door, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a woman with long brown braids and something that looked like a nightgown bending over something that looked like a crib. I stopped and said something like, "Who's in there with you?" She said no one was there. I went back and looked and there was nothing there. I don't know how important this is, but if you stood in the door of her bedroom, there were two large windows directly ahead, which faced the road, and at the far end of the left wall by the windows was a door into a large closet that had its own window. Along the window wall near the closet, there was something like a low shelf or table. The crib I saw was standing right up against the closet door in that same place. And it would have been an odd place to put a crib. On the right side of the room, by the windows, there was a sort of large nook where my friend had her bed. There was also a door in the wall of the nook, opposite the wall, with the windows opened onto the staircase to the attic. I think I told my friend what I had seen. She was a nervous type about things like that, and if I did tell her, she probably got mad at me for scaring her. But I don't remember for sure. That's one of the weird things about these kinds of experiences. I remember most of it in extreme detail, but I can't remember things that happened immediately after. To keep my peace of mind, I always assume there is some kind of reasonable explanation for these kinds of things. For example, vision out of the corner of the eye is not good. Nothing has happened to me personally in many, many years now. I am intrigued by other people's experience and fearful at the same time. I am just 15 years old, but I have a very interesting story to tell. First of all, I have to say that all these stories are very eerie. Now on with the story. My grandma lives in Bethpage, New York. I live right on the other side of town, so I sleep over her house a lot. I was sleeping over her house one day when she told me this story. First off, I just want to tell you that this encounter happened a couple of days after my uncle's death. One day she was shopping at a store. She came out of the store and went to her car. To her surprise, there was an elderly lady standing by the car. My Grams approached this woman. The woman then asked if she can have a ride to the church. My Grams would have normally said no, but to her surprise, she said yes. So the lady got into the car along with my Grams. They were riding in the car, and the lady kept on saying, "You have to have trust in God," over and over again. Then all of a sudden, the lady said she had to get off. My Grams said, "Are you sure?" Because the church was still a ways away, completely down the road. The lady smiled and said, "Of course." So then my Grams pulled over. The lady got out of the car. My Grams said bye. My Grams went to put the car in drive, and when she looked up, the lady was gone. There was nowhere she could have possibly gone. There was absolutely no sign of her. She was nowhere. And it was like none of this had ever happened. Pretty crazy. On Easter Sunday in 1997, my brother and I were getting ready to watch a TV show, and we were the only two who were awake at the time. Well, on the TV sat a large stuffed dog, and suddenly it flew across the room at my brother. We looked at each other and couldn't figure out why the dog had done that. It seemed as if an invisible hand slapped it towards Jay. November 2000, my husband and I were in our home when he looked at me and said, "What on earth is that?" I looked at him blankly because I had heard nothing. He said it sounded like a pie tin hitting all around the outside of the house. He went to look and found nothing. When he came back inside, he saw a white figure pass by the hall doorway. I saw nothing. July 30th, 2000. My mother was staying all night with me, and my husband was working the third shift. We were watching the Blair Witch Project when I heard a knock on my door. My mom looked at me funny when I jumped to answer it. I thought it was my husband's aunt, and I even asked her what she wanted. I looked, and there was no one there. My mom said she had not even heard the knocks. August 7th, 2000, I was outside late, early in the AM, and when I looked at my in-laws' house, I ended up seeing a ball of red light in the yard. Then, when I looked onto their porch, I saw a woman in white open the door and walk in the house. Thing is, my husband's mother was very sick at the time and was bedridden. She passed on February 14th, 2001. On November 9th, 1987, Mom and Dad were eating breakfast at a restaurant. Dad had just been to see the doctor and was told he was in good shape. Then the weirdest thing occurred. They randomly watched a bird fall from the sky dead. That same night, Dad died of a massive heart attack. April of 1998. While I was at my in-laws' house with my husband, we were the only two there at the time. I was walking downstairs to go to the kitchen, where my husband was making an Easter cake. Well, I heard footsteps follow me down those stairs and nothing was behind me. February 13th, 2001. My mother-in-law was in the hospital and several of her brothers and sisters were in the room with her. One sister in particular was sitting with me in the window. Suddenly, a black shape stood at the door and came across the room and passed through us in the window. I saw my Mills life flash before my eyes, of how she played with my husband and his sister when they were little. The sister looked at me and I at her. We looked out the window, and a mist was passing across the lot. None of the other siblings noticed it. They either didn't see it or thought it was an electrical problem. The next night, she passed away. In 1973, my grandfather had to go to the hospital because his mother had a stroke. When he got to the floor, he saw her standing beside her doorway and she looked at him, then vanished. She passed away a few days later. On Saturday, October 16th, 2023, I awoke with a feeling of dread and sensed that something bad was going to take place that very day. I thought of someone bringing a shotgun to my workplace. At 6 p.m., a truck crashed through the doors and it sounded like shotguns going off. Thankfully, no one was hurt. My parents bought this home when I was 6 months old. I am now 31 years old, but the things that went on in that house when I was growing up are still fresh in my mind. My older sister and brother were always telling my parents that things were happening to them, like they would see shadows move in the house. My father said that they were crazy and it was just their imagination, but he was wrong. I can remember that my father let a man stay at our home, and Dad said he did not sleep all night. He felt something had laid down with him. He had seen the bed go right down where this mysterious entity had laid. He never stayed with us again. There were times when the water would flow down the stairs in the bathroom. Doors would open and close, and as I got older, the entity would mess with me. I was sitting downstairs watching the TV, and a white mist came through the sliding glass door to me. I would not go back downstairs for about a year. But when I would, it was like something was behind me on the stairs. There were times in the middle of the night that my bed would shake. I would tell my mom about it, but my dad did not believe us until it scared him half to death one night. We had chimes that hung in the opening going into the living room upstairs, and we had 2 parakeets that hung in the corner of the dining room. My father was sitting at the kitchen table drinking his coffee when the birds started going nuts. It was about 3 a.m. in the morning, then something growled at him from under the cage. That is when he started to believe us, and my dad is really hard to scare. At times you could hear the wood stove open, and it sounded like someone putting wood in it. When you went and looked, there was fresh wood in the stove. I got to where I was so scared to go to bed at nights, but things happened in the daytime too. I would hear someone calling my name when there was no one home but me. I'd see shadows walking down the hall and would go downstairs. Something tried to smother my mom in the night. She could not move to wake my dad in the bed. But one night we were all playing around with a Ouija board, and it told us that 3 ghosts lived in the house. Their names were William, Jake, and Nathan. Their 2 were brothers, and the other was a cousin. They said they were buried under the house. They told us that their last names were Murphin. My mom looked it up, and it is true. An old farmhouse used to be located there, where the house still stands today. The little kids that moved in next door used to walk through the backyard all the time to go down the street. Then they all started going all the way around the house. I asked them why they didn't go through the backyard anymore, and they said that they had seen something standing in the window with red eyes staring at them. The old farmhouse that used to be there burned down, and my dad had our house built on the foundation. Still today, that house will scare you to death. My parents still own the home, and my brother and his family live in it now. Almost 17 years ago, my husband and I rented an old, possibly Victorian 2-bedroom cottage in Davis Row in Arlesey, Bedfordshire. During our stay there, I was pregnant on 2 occasions. Something, or someone in that house, did not seem to like pregnant women. During my first pregnancy, my husband would leave the house around 5:30 a.m. to go to work. Within minutes of his closing the door, I would sense a presence moving around my bed, leaving me frozen to the spot, petrified. This would last for around 2 to 3 minutes, although it seemed like an eternity at the time and would go away as suddenly as it began. There were no such further sensations after our baby was born. I put it down to pregnancy hormones and an overactive imagination at the time. 2.5 years later, during my second pregnancy, the same thing would happen, but this time my husband also noticed some strange occurrences in the cottage. One of the most memorable for him was being woken up. He'd been asleep during the day, having worked a night shift. Early afternoon, by a loud rustling of plastic carrier bags coming from downstairs. After going to investigate, he'd assumed I'd come home from work early, laden with shopping bags. He found no one there. This happened on a couple of occasions. We later found out that the cupboard in which we stored our spare plastic shopping bags had previously been the back door to the cottage. It had since been extended, and the doorway turned into a cupboard. At other times, we individually sensed someone or something behind us in the house on separate occasions, and I swear to this day that someone actually prodded my shoulder from behind a few times. My husband has always believed in ghosts. He claims he saw one while staying at his grandparents' house in Swindon as a child. I, however, am a skeptic. However, I must admit to being mightily relieved when we finally moved out of that cottage some 3 months before our second child was born. We lived just 5 minutes walk away from the former Fairfield Hospital in Arlesey. We never discussed this with any of our neighbors there in case they suggested we were in need of a break at Fairfield. I just happened across your site while browsing the web tonight about true ghost stories. I was telling my wife about a strange event that happened to me while I was in boot camp at Paris Island in 1992. I will never forget this event as long as I live. It is giving me chills even as I type this email. It was late October in 1992, and my platoon was at the old White Rifle Range barracks for night fire exercises. I was selected by the drill instructors with 3 other recruits to stay and watch the barracks while the rest of the platoon went out to set up for the exercises later that night. We were all sitting there on the floor in the middle of the squad bay floor, and we were chatting about various things when the conversation turned to Halloween, which was only a few days away. One of the guys began to talk about stories his grandfather had told about the barracks that we were staying in. Stories about unaliving and self-unaliving that took place in the barracks over the years, and about the ghosts that still haunted the buildings. It was still hot that time of year in South Carolina, and the barracks had no AC, so we decided to open the windows. 2 of us opened the left side windows, while the other 2 opened the right side windows. Any Marine would remember these windows well, as it took 2 people practically to open or close these old windows. Once we got them open, we sat back down to continue our conversation. One of the recruits spoke up and began to say how there were no such things as ghosts and the stories were made up to scare people. The same guy who had told us his grandfather's stories began to say how he believed in ghosts and ghost stories. He asked me and the other recruit if we believed in ghosts or not, and we both said we didn't believe in ghosts. He kept insisting that we were wrong, and the first recruit who said he didn't believe in ghosts began to raise his voice. He shouted out, "There are no such things as ghosts." Just as he finished screaming this, a cold wind blew open the back door of the squad bay, and every window we had opened, approximately 20 windows, slammed shut at the same time. We all looked at each other in shock and stood up and ran into the bathroom. All four of us crammed into one toilet stall and slammed the door shut. We sat there for a few seconds, which seemed like an hour. One of the recruits broke the silence and whispered, "What just happened?" The recruit who told the stories replied, "It must be the ghost." The one recruit again said, "No way. I told you there are no such things as ghosts." As God is my witness, as soon as he said that, another cold breeze blew through the bathroom, and the stall door swung open, slamming into the wall. As the door hit the wall, we heard a moaning voice say, "We are real." We all nearly soiled ourselves. It was so spooky and eerie. We sat there for about 30 minutes before we finally got up the nerve to go back into the squad bay. We never heard or saw anything else the rest of the time we were there. We all swore never to tell anyone else in the platoon what had happened. We knew that nobody would believe it. I will never forget the events of that day. Hello, my name is Marla Raj. I would like to share with you a true experience I had quite a few years ago. When my 3 children were around the ages of 14, 13, and 9, we lived in an old farmhouse in Reno County. The house was actually right on the Rice County-Reno County line. My boyfriend Glenn was an oil field driller, so he was gone from the hours of 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. Anyway, one night as we were watching a video we had rented, there came a knock at our front door. I got up and answered it. To my surprise, there stood in front of me 2 Reno County cops. They asked me, "What is your emergency?" I said, "Excuse me, but I have no emergency." The officers went on to explain that they had received an emergency request from this address. I told the officers we had not called 911. The kids and I continued the movie. Lo and behold, around 20 minutes later, there was another knock at the door. When I answered the door, it was again the Reno County cops. They said, "Mom, we received another 911 call from this address saying you had an emergency." I politely explained to the officers that none of us had even left our chairs to go in the kitchen to make a call. The one officer said, "Mom, are you sure no one made a call from this house?" And I said, No one has left this here room to make a call." That's when they had to pause again. So again, they leave. We started our movie once more, feeling a little frustrated. No longer do we get comfortable and just start to enjoy our movie. Would you believe it? Yes, that's right, another knock at the door. I got up and answered it, and yes, it was the Reno County cops again. They said that they had received yet another 911 call from this residence. By now, they are more than upset. They went on to tell me that to abuse the 911 system is inexcusable, and that if they had to come back again, they were going to take me to jail. I stood up and leaned on the wall that connects to the dining room. I told the officers that none of my children or I had even left the room to make any phone calls. As I'm leaning on the wall, an officer asked me to move away from the wall, so I did. He thought that someone was holding me hostage. By now, these here officers had had enough, and so had I. As they were ready to leave, they again told me that if they received just one more phone call from 911 from this address, they were going to take me to jail. I was so scared I would surely go to jail that night. Thankfully, the officers left and the ringing stopped. Thank God, here just a few weeks ago, a friend of mine was telling me about this farmer who lives there in that same house. He had the same thing happen to him, only it called the cops just once on him. But what is weird is he had no phone. He had just happened to have his mother's cell phone in his pocket. He said he was up in his bedroom when suddenly he heard a female voice yelling to him to answer the phone in a very gruff voice. Well, this guy looks around like, what did I just hear? He continued to look for the papers he was looking for when the voice yelled really loud and said, "Answer the phone." I said he looks down at his shirt pocket and thought, well, It has got to be coming from his mother's cell phone. So he picks it up and answered it. It was a gruff lady. She said, "What is your emergency?" He told the lady that he had no emergency and he did not know what she was talking about. She said, "Well, we received a 911 call from this residence saying that you had an emergency." He kindly told her no, he had no emergency. So that was the only time he had that happen, but it is the same house we lived in when it happened to us. I do not even know this guy other than a brief meeting with him in my driveway. I would like to have some feedback from anyone who has maybe had this type of experience. Please email me and tell me. Hello, my name is Becky, and I am 21 years old. I was looking at the website and decided to share my experience with you. My oldest brother, Bobby, died 2 years ago of cancer. It was a peaceful death, but not for me. I still have moments that I sit and cry. I miss him so bad. Anyway, not long after his death, I started seeing him around the house. He just more or less smiles at me as if to say everything will be okay. Just so you know, he was a big practical joker, especially on me. He would do anything for a laugh, so even now he still does play jokes on me. The one that sticks out in my head the most is the time he turned my water on in the bathroom in the middle of the night. I was asleep, of course, and when I heard the water, it scared me so bad that I sat straight up in bed. I looked into the bathroom, told him he made his point, and I heard him laugh, and then of course he turned the water off. I'm not the only person in my family who has these experiences. My mom also has them. It wasn't 2 weeks ago that she saw him walking in her flower garden. The neighbor thought someone was messing around one time while my parents were gone. So of course he told them what had happened. He described the man that he had seen walking around about 6 feet 2 inches tall, long blonde hair, and a beard that looked to be maybe in his early 30s. He came close to the house to get a better look, and of course he was gone. My parents just laughed and said that was our son that passed away to cancer. He's still here. The man just looked confused and walked away. I can lay in bed at night and watch my son sleep and see his hair move like someone is playing with his hair. But of course it doesn't scare me because I know it's just Bobby. My son can even see him at times, even when I can't. He will be sitting on the floor playing and just start laughing and saying Bobo, which is what he called him, because at the time of his death, my son was only a year old and couldn't speak well yet. I have also noticed that things I have lost and hunt for turn up in plain sight a few days later, almost like he has found them for me and put them where I can find them. He was also a smoker, and sometimes I can smell the smoke and even see it. I believe he is my guardian angel and he will always be with me.
Welcome to the end of the video. And if you got there, please say Halloween 2024 in the comments section. That way I know you got to the end of the video and you can actually subscribe if you're new and comment and share and do whatever you want. I'm really excited for Halloween coming up. It's almost October, guys, and if you're ready for the super long 20-hour video on Wednesday, let me know in the comment section as well. Love you guys, and I'll see you in the next video. And don't forget to be a channel member, because that would help. And these videos don't really make me much anymore, even if I spend 7 hours on them. And at least the other 10 to 12 hours I'm working on the long videos, I get something out of it, so that's good. But obviously I'm not blaming you guys. It's just YouTube. It's kind of frustrating, but you know, I love you guys, and I'll see you in the next video.